think it was very important that I grew up where I did. Gary, Indiana, which is a suburb of Chicago. Both cities were considered the most segregated cities in the North. I went to a school, elementary school, that was segregated and had just opened up and just became integrated 2 years before I went there. The white teachers, went on a strike because they did not want to teach black children. While I went through school, in particular high school, I never had the opportunity to be a part of a college preparatory class. And that impacted on me negatively in terms of my reading and writing. I was always good in science, in particular biology and chemistry. In fact, in chemistry, I had the highest score of the national board study. One thing that happened, I went to talk to my chemistry teacher. I said, talk to him about going to college. And he says, well, I don't think you'll be successful in college. I think you need to go and get a job in the lab in a steel mill in Gary, Indiana. And that, I was confused, I didn't know a lot about racism at that time, but looking back, that was clearly an example of racism and why we can't get ahead, is because we're always being told what we can't do as opposed to what we can do. Microaggression was not something I recognized because I was always trained to be assertive, not be afraid, particularly of the white community, and I got that from my mother. In medical school, as you know, we have rotations where you're in and out of the city. And I went to move in with some of my classmates who were white. I told them, make sure that they were into blacks. As I was moving in, one of my classmates said the owner wanted to talk to me. I went over there and he said, I want you out in 1 hour. If you're not, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. That was hurtful too. The first time that I think I remembered that race played a major role in my life. And so that I remember as well too.
My parents certainly informed me about challenges of life, but living in America when you're not in the majority population. But nonetheless, I didn't dwell on any of that. I just felt that I was as good as anybody and could perform as well as anybody. And as long as I did what I needed to do, I could succeed. Certainly there have been challenging situations I believe suggested that there were some levels of racism here and there. Even in the medical environment, there's challenges. As my career has gone on, I've realized that there have been obstacles. I realized there have been challenges. I realized there are opportunities that I was not given, being dismissed with ideas or talked over even in meetings. They come up with great ideas, but then it's not important, but then somebody else brings it up 15 minutes later and it's a great idea. I remember one time several years ago, I walked into the operating room just with my scrubs on, didn't have my ID right in front of me, didn't have my doctor's coat. The patient of mine was actually being prepared for surgery with the anesthesiologist and the anesthesiology resident. The anesthesiologist kind of knew who I was, but had walked out the room and was going down the hall to tend to another room. So there's just a anesthesia resident, a young woman who's probably in her late 20s, if not early 30s, blonde woman, white race. And so nobody else in the room. The scrub nurse was just starting to get some of the instruments together off on the side. And so I walk up and say, will we be sure to give the patient some antibiotics? And the young woman said, well, as soon as one of the surgeons shows up, I'll chat with the surgeon and confirm that that's what we're doing. She didn't realize that I was the surgeon and the head surgeon. But I looked like everybody else who was cleaning the room, so that's what she presumed, that that's who I was. I just quietly moved off to the side and said, okay. And then when the resident showed up, she soon realized that everybody around me knew who I was and she didn't. And she moved forward and just carried on with the case. Never apologized, but carried on with the case.
I remember seeing a patient once, and I was so happy to be able to go and interview her. And I had my white coat on and my little badge saying it was a urology resident, and went into her room and was going to ask her why she was there and get her history. And she said to me, honey, the trash is over there. I said, I'm Dr. Coleman, and I'm here to interview you. She said, oh, I thought you were one of the service people. And I said, no, I'm not. And I explained to her who I was. And then she went on to tell me a little bit about herself, but she still never really apologized for that initial remark. And it really sort of has stuck in my mind for a while. And as time went on, I actually ended up having to take care of her. She had very bad metastatic bladder cancer. And one night we had to work with her through the whole night with trying to help her irrigate her bladder. She at one point she says, honey, I think I'm just tired. I think I'm just ready to go on to the Lord. And I sat there and I prayed with her, and she passed on. So it was a very emotional moment, and I was glad that we were able to experience together. But she actually helped me out twice in my life. She didn't really know it the first time when I met her, and she just thought I was a service person. And then towards the end of her life, when we actually got to share those times together. So, yeah.
I've had a great life. I've done so many, many things. And my first surgery at the hospital, I was told by the chief surgeon, you're going up to the 8th floor to surgery. You'll be working with one of the doctors here at the hospital. Said, I'll be coming by to see how you're doing. So I got to the surgery early, and we waited in the operating room for almost 30 minutes over the time. And the anesthesiologist said, I wonder where the surgeon is. He said, but I'm going to go and look. He left the operating room while I stayed with the nurse and the patient. He came back into it and he's saying, with almost tears in his eyes, saying, you're to go out of the operating room, Dr. Hollowell, and Dr. X is there to talk to you. He was standing by one of the places where we scrub. He says, you're not to be in my operating room ever. You're not to touch any of my patients. And he was white, and he was in there, and I was stunned. So I waited outside while this man washed his hands and went in to do his surgery. About 2 or 3 months after that, I was in the hospital, and my chief resident called me again and said, there's a patient up on the 8th floor that's having some post-surgical problems. And I went up there, the nurse showed me the chart, and I saw that he'd had some surgery, and he had a wound that had opened up, and he was bleeding very badly. And I was able to get the area to stop bleeding, do all the suturing, got him in good shape. And then the patient looked at me and said, thank you very, very much. He's white, I'm black. And he says, and I want to thank you for all you've done in order to get me well. My chief surgeon got up there at that time, after he finished, and my chief got the chart and looked at it, and he looked at me and he says, you know whose patient this is?
Oh, no.
The doctor that told you do not touch any of my patients. He came in, and he saw me, and he grabbed the chart and went in the room with the patient. But before he could get in the room, everybody was there. The chief of the hospital, the chief of surgery, my resident, and me. A voice of the patient came out into the hallway. Can you have the doctor that just treated me, that was me, come back into my room? And he pointed to his surgeon and told him, I'd like you into my room also. And at that time, the administrator of the hospital came over to the door as the other surgeons. And the patient said, I am so pleased with what that your doctor did for me to save my life. And I want you, he was talking to the doctor that didn't want me to ever touch any of his patients. And he says, and I want to tell you, I'm a vice president of General Motors company. And he says, and I would like to say to you and to the administration of the hospital, we'll never send another one of a General Motors employee or anybody to this hospital unless you correct this. And when he did, the guy who told me was told by the patient, you're to say you're sorry of what you've done to this doctor, me. And he said, and I want you to shake hands. He also said in front of everybody, what medical school did you finish, doctor? And I told him the medical school, Meharry. He says, I also want you to know that when I leave here and get back to my office, I am going to call down to Meharry and tell them that General Motors wants to take and give to your school any type of revenue or help will come from General Motors in Detroit, Michigan. And that was what happened. And he put it in my name. And he paid for all of my tuition.